we've been using this tool now, going back to kind of what I was talking about for the competitive advantage of using this to find out how are we pacing in the market from a product standpoint, and how are we pacing in the market across from a competitive standpoint? Who's in front of us, and how do we catch them? What are they doing? And you know how obsessive I am. I'm texting you the day after the end of the quarter. All right, when's the quarterly report coming out? I want to see if we gain ground on X, Y, or Z company. And so I love the platform that you have. And today I want to just talk about how this platform can be of a benefit both for installers and sales companies from a competitive perspective, but probably more importantly, considering the market that we're in right now, how do we use this data to help keep our businesses healthy? So with that kind of backdrop, Chris, can you kind of just give us a backdrop on Ohm and what the platform does from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. That's a good background. It's now I understand why you like the leaderboard so much, Jared.
Yeah.
Very competitive person. I'm also worried about getting on Strava with you. We're going to be checking that religiously. Yeah. So just background on Ohm. Like you said, we collect. We've been around since 2017. So but prior to starting Ohm, I worked at an energy finance company that did a lot of solar finance, and that's kind of where I got some of the early ideas. So we've been at it for a while and collecting data from every source we can find to get the best view into the market. And you said earlier, you all used to look at weekly reports, right? Or, monthly reports. And that's really what drives motivation and action. And that's been a big part of the ethos of the company is how do we offer data and insights very quickly in real time to drive action. It's not kind of a scoreboard like 3 months later. It's like, what's happening right now and how can we change our business because of it? So That's really where we focus. And then, you mentioned, the focus on solar. We now cover a lot of different energy transition categories. So EV charging and battery storage and the things like heat pumps. So, we view those as very important to the entire energy transition. And we want to cover all of them.
So how do you go about gathering all that data? I mean, there's a million different jurisdictions throughout the country. I mean, trying to get permit data and trying to get interconnection data from thousands and thousands of utility companies. How in the world do you guys go about gathering that data?
Well, we've been at it for a while, so it's very state specific, and it's taken a while. So, and we have a big team. So, it's been interesting. I've been working on getting some data sources or partnerships set up for 5 years, and they're now just happening. So it continuously gets better.
How much of the gathering?
But there are a few different.
How much of that gathering is done manually, and how much have you guys been able to automate through software and to be able to extract data?
Yeah, a lot of it's automated, but to be honest, we have a really high bar for quality, and I think you've seen that. Like you've pointed things out, and we quickly correct it, or as quick as possible.
Oh yeah, you bet. You got to get me those extra 50 installs that you were missing. I got to show that I just passed so and so, right?
Yeah. So a lot of it's automated, but there's a lot of QA and review, and even if the data is from the source is right. It may just be, or the source is one thing, it may just be actually wrong on their end. So there's a lot of double checking that we do. And so there's a lot of manual review and human review.
Gotcha. So of all the different data that you're compiling, what's the data that you find to be most exciting?
Yeah, well, I think it's always exciting. I mean, it's always kind of like, Christmas when we put out our monthly reports of, what the market's telling us. So every month it's very exciting. I think the thing that we're most excited about for the market is, this has been a big downturn, right? And we talk to a lot of installers or partners, and it's not very helpful to remind people of, the market being down 25% or 30%. Everybody knows that.
Sure.
So we try to stay focused on the positives. And one of the positives is that even during this downturn, a lot of the long-term fundamentals for distributed solar have gotten better during this period. So, interest rates have taken a huge hit on the market. There's liquidity issues, there's regulation. All those things have been difficult, but things like demand for power, long-term outlook for utility rates because of that, those have all changed to the positive in the last couple of years with increasing AI demand. That is going to be a nice lift for wholesale power prices over the long term. Things like energy grid resilience, those things have gotten worse and better for our industry. The number of storms and the interest from utilities and that has all gotten more positive. So I think those are, if you can stay in for the long term and focus on that, which is easy for us to say, harder for an installer, but those are positives.
And that's huge, right? Because a lot of us that are in the ocean right now, treading water, just trying to keep our heads above. It's like, how and when are we going to get out of this? But it's nice to know there is a lot of smooth sailing. There's some good currents that are waiting for us if we can get through this part of the storm, because of what you talked about, rising utility rates, obviously a push from policy to push clean energy, and then just the demand on the grid as the world continues to use more and more electricity. Let me ask you about some of the trends that you're seeing this year as you guys have gathered this data. Where are we at as far as product mix between third-party owned products, lease and PPA products, and purchases? Where are we at on the year right now nationally?
Yeah, can I share some data on that? I think it's always
you bet.
I'll have some hard numbers here. So obviously it's increased, as you know, and I kind of want to hear from you, like what's happened with your business. But here's some data that we have, just through July. And we can look at a national basis, but it's helpful to see state by state. Okay. So Arizona kind of bottomed at like 8-9%, and it's already up to 49, 50% almost, and just in Arizona. And then California, if you look at NEM 3.0, so like there's this big backlog, NEM 3.0, it's gone from like 25 a quarter to now a half. So pretty dramatic shift. And on a national basis, I think if you were to make some adjustments for NEM 3.0, we just published this, it might be like 45% on a national basis, third-party ownership. But I think even like on a very recent basis, like a sales basis, originations, like the last month, my guess is it's like 55 or almost 60%. It's pretty high, although we have seen it level out a bit. And that's probably for a number of reasons, but it has slowed down a bit. The change has slowed down.
And I think as we see, the Fed just cut rates, and if we see a little bit of softening on the purchase side, that'll probably start evening out even a little bit more, maybe even swing back towards the purchasing products. But obviously, as it's been harder and harder to be able to show a savings with the interest rates as what they are, and the effect that it has on monthly payments, the TPO products have been much more advantageous this year, particularly for reps that sell on savings, when they're doing solar. How about battery attachment? Where are we at on battery attachment this year?
Yeah, I'll share some data on that too. I mean, I think the big story on batteries is obviously California. California NEM 3.0 is like 80% now on new storage projects. If you look at overall, it's still at 50%. So you've got California and Hawaii really like boosting the overall national market, but we've seen a few other markets kind of hit a tipping point, which is like above 10%. And Arizona is actually in that bucket. So like Arizona, Texas, and Colorado through July that it's like exceeded 10%. And I think that's a few reasons. Like in Arizona, you're closer to that, but there's been a change in buyback rates, kind of slow step down. And then also I think some of the utilities have like pilot programs for bring your own battery programs. And then in Texas, I think it's more of a resiliency story. There's been some big storms.
Right.
In Colorado, I think also Excel has similar programs. So I think there's a lot of movement on their surface. California is moving the national market, but like there's some interesting trends at different states that have hit a tipping point.
I think too, with the introduction of the Powerwall 3, being able to put out the voltage, the amperage that needs to run some of these high demand items has now gotten reps really excited about it. For us in Arizona, at least, it was like, batteries are okay, but if I can't promise you that it's actually going to be able to run your house if the power goes out, let's just wait for the future. And that's what it's always been. But with this Powerwall 3 and stores, and there's a couple other ones that can put out a higher running amperage, they've gotten more and more popular.
Yep.
Like you mentioned, they work so well with the way that the rate plans are set up here. We're seeing that attachment continue to go up and up. And for sure, it's the future, right? Be able to add it on to old systems for people that it was too expensive or didn't make sense back then. And of course, for everybody that want to take advantage of the savings they provide moving forward, I think we're going to see more and more of an attachment. What are you seeing with system sizes across the country? How much are we trending? I know that obviously the market's down. Is the system size reflecting in that data as well?
I don't have that at my fingertips. I think anecdotally, yes, I can double check that. But yeah, I think with higher demand and has usually ticks up every year if you look over a long period of time. Just a question on storage for you too. I'm curious.
Sure.
Two things, like how how has it changed the sales process for you? Like, does it require a lot of sales training to sell a battery? And on the install time too, how much more painful is it to get a permit for storage and train your folks on doing that?
Yeah. So from a sales side, I love it. I think that it's a way to differentiate yourself and to give a customer something that they've never heard of before, right? Depending on which market you're in, it can be pretty saturated. And so if you can approach a customer with a completely different idea of how to save money or how to manage their power or how to become more independent, the battery just gives you more selling points, particularly here in Arizona where we have what's called time of use, and you have certain times of the day where you're getting charged more than other times of the day. So if I can charge that battery at what we call off-peak rates of 4 or 5 cents in the middle of the night, and then program it to discharge in the afternoon when I'm otherwise paying 20, 30, or 40 cents a kilowatt hour, when you figure in demand fees on top of time of use rates, we're having a really cool arbitrage equation here. And so it's a fun thing to talk about where it's like, Mr. Customer, you're essentially buying your power at wholesale rates 24 hours a day when you have a storage bank. And if the power goes out, your refrigerator and your lights and your AC and your garage are still going to work, right? We can still power your entire house depending on how much storage capacity you want to put on your house with solar to charge that and back it up if the power ever goes out for an extended period of time. So we're offering a more whole home solution, which is, I think, really exciting from a sales perspective. And then you asked go ahead.
Yeah, from an install perspective.
Yeah, from an install perspective, obviously that's a whole other beast, right? Because the reps are super excited about it and they go and they want to add it on all these existing solar systems. Well, now you have to figure out, how do I add a battery to this system? What are the costs involved there? What's the engineering that takes place there? And it's a little bit more difficult than sales would like. And so designs can take a little bit longer. It's new to utilities, and so they're kind of going back and forth and trying to figure out, all right, how much extra juice are we putting on the grid here? We need to reevaluate the AC output on these systems now. Are we going to make customers lose their grandfathering on their current systems? And so there's a little bit more thought that does need to go that needs to go in there. From a permit perspective, I don't think that we've had too much back and forth. Although some of these jurisdictions are getting a little bit more concerned, and so they're adding other requirements like putting a smoke and fire detector in the garage close to that battery and have it hooked into the central fire system on the house. So there's other requirements that some of these HJs are coming out with that again just require extra thought and extra work on the installer side. But it's something that we're well equipped to adjust to, because that's where the market's headed.
Yeah, great. All right, those don't sound too painful. I think I've heard worse.
Now, what I will say though, obviously, when you're doing a battery, that requires extra man hours. It's batteries still aren't cheap. The prices have come down, which is nice, but it's still a major construction project, and we're talking about a $15,000 battery. And what concerns me is a lot of the installers out there, just like trying to get reps to come and sell for them to increase volume, are selling the battery as a stop loss, right? They're selling, as a loss leader, where they're not making any money on the battery at all. And a lot of times, so their adders are so low, you come over here and sell a battery for so low, not realizing that these batteries have a lot of extra costs that go along with them. And, we've seen a lot of our friends and a lot of companies in California, where you mentioned that adoption going so high, they've gone out of business because they didn't price it correctly. And it was like, oh, we'll just do battery as an adder the same way we would with an MPU. And it's like, it doesn't work that way when you're dealing with such a high ticket, that product is not something that you just slap on and be done. It requires a lot that goes with it, and the cost can vary. You got to make sure that you're planning that correctly. And so I think that with the market changing, we're going to have to see battery prices probably bump up a little bit from where they've been, because installers haven't, I don't think they've priced them correctly.
It's interesting. I hadn't thought about that as an issue in California. I know people are still adjusting to it, but it's interesting for you to say that they just weren't pricing it. They weren't pricing it properly. Yeah, for sure. I think that happened.
Because you just think about that too. It's not only you're dealing with just the cost of itself, but then you're also having to think about cash flow, right? If I'm outlaying all that money for the equipment, and that's already putting me at stress, and now I'm adding another, tens of thousands of dollars on battery equipment on top of that I have to float until I get the job installed and funded, all of a sudden cash flow gets spread out even further. So it can be very difficult.
The other thing on storage, there's attachment rates, but we've also seen is, you can see this in Arizona, it's just a proliferation of VPP programs. And even just early stage pilots or examples of utility commissions requiring the utilities to kind of investigate it and come up with a plan in a year. There's a lot of like seeds that have been planted for those types of programs, in Colorado, or there's actually one live in North Carolina now with the Duke Power Pair program. So I think that's an exciting area for the market.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see what happens with all that. What are you seeing with what are the hot spots in the nation right now for install volumes? What are the new and upcoming markets?
Yeah, I can show some data on that. I mean, there's some bright spots. Let me pull up. I think Illinois has been one that is really positive. I know there's, Sunrun talks about it in their earnings call. How that's been a growth market. I think the Northeast has done a little bit better too, and the rest, you're in Arizona's been tough, right? I mean, so I think those markets have been challenged, but Illinois is a bright spot. I also think we're seeing a little bit of a turnaround in Texas and Florida, which is really positive, because those are now big drivers of the national market. Texas and Florida are they're bigger factors.
Which states?
So I think those are
which states have struggled the most this year?
Obviously California. California in May and June was down over 50%. So I think California has struggled the most. But then the Sun Belt, so Arizona, Nevada, those have been hit pretty hard. I think the areas where power is a little bit lower and there was less margin there as interest rates went up, so kind of day one savings got squeezed. Whereas in the Northeast, where power prices are higher, or in Illinois, where there's a program and a net metering change coming up, they've just done better.
The urgency allows everybody's just gone there to blitz, and they've just pumped that market. I know we had a team that went there a couple weeks ago and absolutely just killed it, right there at the deadline, or at least for that installer's deadline.
Yeah.
So looking at all these trends here, where are we headed for 2025? Where do you think we're going here?
Well, we talked about the long-term fundamentals and how those are positive, but hopefully we don't have to wait that long for those. I think in the short term, for 2025, the biggest thing is interest rates. And so, there's an announced rate cut, and I think, we're not hedge fund analysts, but I think there's a consensus of maybe a point or a point and a half over the next 6 months. And that's huge, right? That's really going to boost the market. And so we were a little bit more positive on 2025, where I think we have a forecast. I think it's like plus 8%, so 5 to 10%. Whereas this year for 2024, when we add everything up, we think it'll be down 23 or 24%. So positive in 2025.
Good.
I think other than interest rates, a big theme is hopefully some balancing of the installer landscape. So hopefully we're kind of out of the woods on large bankruptcies, or and I see companies, now that the dust has settled, leaning in a little bit more on expansion, thinking about what states to move into, or rehiring. And so hopefully the dust has settled a bit and people can focus more on growth next year.
I'd love your insight, and I don't know how much maybe you have or have not, but when you look at all the companies that have gone out of business this year, as you're looking at the data there, were there any specific things that you saw that, like, common trends within specific companies where you're like, this company's in trouble? I can see from the data what's happening with whatever it may be. This company's heading in a really, really bad direction. I mean, obviously, year over year, the market's been down in general, so you can look at everybody and say that they're in danger. But did anything stick out with some of these big companies like Titan or SunPower or some of these other big ones that have had to close their doors this year?
Yeah, I can talk about that. It might be more interesting to talk about the companies that are doing well. And what
that's where I want to go next. I want to see, like, here's what to look out for in the trends, but like what are we seeing that where companies are growing? What do we want to see from them as well? So we'll go positive after we go negative.
Okay. All right. So I think it's always hard to know exactly what's going on in a company with their financials, right? I mean, even a large distributor, I think struggles to know those exact answers. Even a company managing their financials is tough. But I think general trends that that we see or indicators, not even like just characteristics. So like one, I think, is just overexpansion, right? Like they, kind of did a shotgun approach, and they went from 1 or 2 states to 5, and maybe smaller markets that had really bad permitting, and they just overextended themselves and weren't thinking about interconnect timelines. And on that note, like we have data. I think you look at this, like we can see relative install timelines. So I think people that have slow install timelines, probably indicates they don't have as tight operations, and that has cash flow implications.
And I think those are two big ones, right? And that's what we're looking at is install timelines, that median install timeline. Like, we pride ourselves to make sure that we're the top of that list, because the amount of money that flows through your organization, even going up to install, is so much. And if you can't get that install time down, you're going to end up bleeding out. And then even more importantly is the PTO timelines from there, because we're not getting M1s anymore like we used to. All money's getting paid at PTO, or a lot of the money is getting done at install, and a lot of it's required to get the rest of it at PTO. Your profit or your actual net revenue may not come until that PTO payment. And so if you see a company that's got a PTO timeline of, whatever it is, months after install, that's the biggest red flag, because they're going to end up running out of cash. And then if you're in sales, your pipeline's in jeopardy at that point.
Yeah, it's a huge issue for the industry, and obviously at a company level, but for the industry, it's kind of an existential risk, but also an opportunity for us to improve permitting and interconnect timelines. And I think we had chatted earlier about Solar App and how I think you all use that in certain areas in Arizona. And as a company, we're working with a lot of the organizations that are trying to drive the adoption of things like Solar App, or even a version of that for interconnect, right? Solar App's an automated permitting approval software. Can we do that for interconnect? So we're working with a lot of organizations that are driving that from a policy perspective. And what we're doing is collecting a lot of the data for them to show, hey, these are the areas where, it's really, really difficult, and, you empowering them with that information for those discussions with policymakers and lobbyists.
So for the companies that are doing well, what are the trends that you see that they have in common? Probably those two are going to be a big one, right? Quick install times and quick PTO times. Anything else that you would see in there that would say this company is probably looking good, or that they're going to be on solid foundation?
Yeah, actually, I had some data prepared for this. I thought it might be interesting. Yeah, we definitely see a discrepancy or outliers. So this is some analysis on what we did on major markets like Texas. Texas market, red line there, down 35%. Florida down 33%. But you see these companies, we've anonymized them here, but two installers are flat when the market's down 35%, and another one's up 100%. Same thing in Florida, doubled or tripled their business. There's a lot of outliers there. So there are installers that even in the downturn are winning and taking share. And we actually kind of looked at a lot of those companies and said, what are the major characteristics? And I think some common themes are, one, they were able to shift to leases very quickly. And so they were early on in that trend. I think also the ones that are really growing have a dealer model. So they're not vertically integrated. They've been able to bring on new sales teams that have left other installers. So I think that's a big theme. Like they're not vertically integrated. They're looking for external sales. The other thing is we talked about, they have the ones that are good have good install efficiencies. So kind of like top tier install efficiencies and PTO efficiencies. And then I think generally there's a couple outliers where there's some new companies that have come in, but generally they've been in business for a while, so 5+ years. So I think those are common characteristics in the analysis that we did on those outliers.
Very interesting there. Have you seen, I think you guys track, I know TPO and own products. Does the number of lenders, have you seen the diversification there help? Because we've even had troubles on the finance side, right? Where you have a bank that can't pay, or, we're seeing banks that are having to delay their timelines that have caused a couple big installers to have to close their doors this year just because they weren't getting paid fast enough to handle their cash flow necessities. Diversifying from a finance perspective, have you seen that as an advantage?
Yeah, I think we've definitely seen that as a trend. I think it's kind of like table stakes now, I guess. I think most people are doing that, where maybe they had one provider, maybe even just one loan provider, and weren't doing leases, and now they're doing loans and leases. Or even within that, they have a couple of providers. So yeah, for sure, if you look at the data. And I talked to the folks at Enerflow about this, and they track it as well, and have seen that just more partners, more diversification. I think it's a smart thing to do.
How about additional products? I mean, so a diversification in lending partners, but what about for other products, right? We talk about solar, and we've talked about storage. You said that you're starting to track other things like EV and other things of that nature. What advantage do you see there for companies that are trying to expand their product suite?
Yeah, I think storage is probably the number one thing, and there's a big opportunity there, and there's even just a small number of people that know how to sell storage. So if you look at it, it's really isolated. So yeah, storage for sure. I think EV charging is probably the best one. And I think when you look at it on a consumer basis, I'd love to hear from you what's happening in Arizona, but that's a big driver of solar is, oh, I just got an EV, or vice versa. Some people think about the journey, is that an electrification journey, and so they do both. So like being able to offer that either directly in-house or have like some kind of referral or partner makes it easier to sell or better sell to the customer. I think the other one that we're tracking is heat pumps, more for the Northeast. I know there's not a lot of heat pumps in Arizona, but we see that with the IRA. Folks are there's a bigger heat pump market. It's a harder sell, I think. It's not as easy as solar. So I think a lot of solar contractors talk about electrification, home electrification, but I think there's a big learning curve there. There are smaller tickets. Every heat pump is unique, right? I know solar is unique too, but I think heat pumps, everybody's house is a little bit different. It's harder. It's a different trade. So there's definitely some complexities and headwinds to those other categories.
Sure. But I think having those other products, whether it be a heat pump or EV, aerosol, insulation, HVAC, even getting roofing, right? Doing those things in-house also can help diversify some of the risk that installers have to face on doing solar only, right? That's something that we've been focused on this year, and it's helping so far for sure.
I think the other thing we see is the commercial markets held up a little bit better, and so we've seen some of the residential installers, particularly in California, where there's just a different impact on the NEM change and a bigger lag there. So we've seen folks explore the commercial market more. And then also, I'm curious if you guys have looked at this, but there's a huge base of installed homes. And so we've seen a lot of people use this downturn to try to upsell batteries to those folks, or even service work if their contractor is, if it's an orphan system. So I think they're now probably 40% of the installed base out of 5 million homes. It's like 2 million homes is orphaned where their installer is no longer around.
Yeah, that is a big deal. We've run campaigns internally to reach out to customers of some of our friends who have gone out of business and reach out to them and say, hey, sorry that this happened, but we're happy to come over and do a diagnosis for you and let you know, make sure the system's working, give you recommendations if it's not, and then, obviously use that as an opportunity if we can to help reduce their energy consumption more by adding an energy efficient product or fixing their solar system or upgrading their system and adding a battery if it makes sense. So yeah, that is something I think it's a huge opportunity, because with that many number of orphan systems after this year, that's gonna be a big demand, and customers are concerned about it, right? They're wondering, what in the world am I supposed to do if my system stops working? I don't know who to go to. I don't know what to even ask for. Solar is still kind of mysterious to most homeowners. They know that it helps reduce their bill, but they don't know how to diagnose the system. They don't know what to necessarily look for. And so I think that is an opportunity in a way that companies that are still in business can help serve the market for sure.
Absolutely. I think you had also, you had asked about kind of like bigger risks for the overall market. And I think the biggest, there's all these tides of positives, but I think the biggest risk is probably regulation and consumer protection.
Sure.
And I think unfortunately, the orphan systems is going to be tough to solve, right? Like we can fix a lot of things going forward, but there's still going to be this base of consumers that may have been sold a bad product, or something just breaks and their installer's out of business, and it just creates negative press. So I think that's the biggest risk. And the existing contractors leaning into that work and helping service that market, hopefully it's a business decision and can make money on it, but also it's important to the long-term sustainability of the market perception and regulation.
And it's pretty incredible. I mean, obviously we deal with this with some of our own customers or existing customers of companies that haven't gone out of business, but we've seen it as we start to service some of these orphan customers, and they're saying, does the system seem to be working? It's like, well, yeah, it works, but it's not saving me any money. The guy promised me that I was going to see 50% of what I was spending before, and I'm basically paying the same thing, or maybe I'm even paying more than I was. And so, that's a problem obviously with orphan customers, but it's still a problem with the way that solar is being sold in general. And I think that the regulation that you're talking about is going to come down the pipeline, and it's either going to be self-regulated by sales groups and installers, or it's going to come from the powers that be, and they're going to put in, some sort of a requirement or some sort of a licensing for reps to be able to go out and sell solar, to make sure that they know how to do it right and they understand what solar is capable of from a helpful standpoint and what it's capable from, to hurt people if not sold correctly, not sized correctly, not priced correctly. There's just so much money in this business, and unfortunately, there's a lot of bad players out there. Unfortunately, there's a lot of reps who sell out of ignorance because they just heard their trainer sell it a certain way, and their trainer heard their trainer sell it a certain way. And so it's this game of telephone that passes on bad practice and ends up hurting the customers. And so I think that installers, if we really want that solar to be long-term and we want to get into those smoother waters with the currents, the good currents that are awaiting us, we're going to have to make sure that we go into those good currents with a good boat, and that we have good sales partners, that we have good compliance, that reps are well trained and they understand how tax credits work. They understand how buybacks work. They understand how offsets work, so that we're not over-promising and under-delivering, which sadly is kind of I'd say the generality in solar right now.
Yeah, I think the industry is doing a lot of great work right now, but it'll still be a challenge going forward.
What are you most excited for moving forward with solar? We talked about that there is an opportunity for it to continue to grow. What do you look forward to seeing here in the next couple months, as we end this year and get into the new year?
Well, yeah, in the short term, looking forward to less bad news about, installer bankruptcies or, credit crunch. And I think, most excited about the potential lift from interest rates in the short term. And then long term, what a fascinating market to be in, right? And important piece of the energy transition. And I think what I'm most excited about is, for a long time, there's been this, utilities in the solar industry have kind of been at odds. And I think over time, utilities, will rely more on the solar industry. They're the folks that are going to be doing these VPP programs. I had heard, more recently from somebody who had spent 15 years as a utility executive that, she sees them intersecting more. And, one of the main reasons is utilities have this huge demand curve to meet. And, it's no longer a question of, well, if your rooftop solar might take a little bit here or there. Like, they need our help from that perspective to meet the demand and to deliver on these DER and VPP programs. So I think that's kind of a sentiment shift that's happened more recently and bodes well for the future.
Fantastic. Any other data or any other insights that you think are valuable to our listeners that you want to share?
No, I really like the info that we shared out on the installers that are doing well. I think there's a lot more on our platform around two things. One, if you're thinking about expanding, there's a lot of great information on policies and forecasts by market. I'm really excited about the permitting and interconnect timeline data that we're collecting. And it's a big opportunity for the industry, also a big opportunity for installers to help out. So, we have a data partnership program. They can share information and help in that initiative. So we're excited to be help in some way to solve that problem.
Well, I'm excited for Q3 numbers to come out. Anxious to see if we've been able to, obviously year over year trends, but hopefully starting to see some improvement from month over month and quarter over quarter. And obviously we wish everybody well in this business. It's been a rough year seeing so many companies go under, and it's a small community. Solar's very tight knit. And so, even though we're all competing with each other, it's always tough to know of a friend or an associate that's not been able to make it through. And so hopefully we can keep everybody that's still in it can keep fighting and get through this, and, pay attention to these important pieces of data that Chris has shared with us today, so that we can be around for 2025 and start cruising again. Hopefully we have the opportunity to get back to the 2022 and 2021 days where interest rates were down and solar was just flourishing. We'll get there. But in the meantime, we got to make smart decisions, got to make tough decisions, and got to pay attention to what's going on in the marketplace. So, Chris, I appreciate you being on the podcast and sharing all this data and the things that you've been able to glean with you and your team. It's just invaluable information. So super grateful that you've been on the show with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm sure we'll be talking, when those come out. Look out for that on Wednesday night.
Good. We'll be excited. Well, hey, I appreciate your time with us today, and for everybody listening, thank you for being here on the Fusion Power Podcast. We will see you next time.
All right. Thanks, Jared.
All right.